It's spooky month, baby.
And in this video, I'm going to be taking random characters that you all suggested from indie horror games and fusing them with one another. Let's create some chaos! Alright, so I've gone through your comments of the little community post that I put out, and I've whittled it down to about 20 that fall under the indie gaming umbrella. Some of these might not be indie. I'm not familiar with all the games you suggested, but let's spin for our first fusion. Also, I have a little dealer's choice down here, meaning I get to choose who gets fused if it lands on it. So, round one. Ooh. All right. Our first fusion, first character is Monica from DDLC, fused with Elster from Signalis. Don't know if I'm saying that right. All right, nothing left to it but to do it. Let's get started. To begin, I was really excited when I rolled Monica for this challenge because I've wanted to make art videos of Doki Doki Literature Club and some other video games I really enjoy that I don't think would translate particularly well into videos, but I've just always wanted to draw art as them, and so now I have an excuse. However, that excitement was immediately squandered when I spun Elster because I've never heard of her or Signalis at all. Just no idea. I didn't even know what that was. But after looking at it, I kind of want to play it now, so that'd be pretty cool. And while in the planning stage, I bounced back and forth between ideas of what I could do with the character. I was initially relieved that I got two humanoid characters because I thought that would make this fusion easy, but then I thought about how that was more of a limitation rather than a blessing. Elster's design initially seemed very bare with just the black suit with a tiny bit of red, which wasn't a lot to work with. However, Monica, on the other hand, had a little bit more going on with the different parts of her outfit, different colors and whatnot, so I took that and really ran from there. But what I'm really happy about with this video as a whole is that immediately I decided that I was going to use this episode to push my art and practice things that I wanted to get better at. For this particular video, that was posing and background work. And I think it worked out really good. The pose in this one with the foreshortening and forced perspective of the gun looks so good. However, one arm sticking out is still a part that I need to work on. I haven't nailed the foreshortening and depth of the arm, and so it looks a lot shorter than it really is. I think here it's a little okay because the wrinkling of the sleeve kind of covers up the fact that it's very short, but even with reference pictures, I'm still struggling to understand how long and how far away from the face it should be, depending on what angle it's being held at. Now, for the actual design, I had to go through some of the Signalis gameplay to see what other elements from Elster that I could possibly include. Hopefully I didn't spoil anything for myself, as it looks like a pretty interesting game. And there was this one scene in the beginning after like the initial gameplay loop, where this cyborg face is slowly making its way over Elster's face. I don't know what it means, but it was just another element for Elster that I could use, so I added it. Now for the background itself, I think it might actually be the best part. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before, but the thought of detail really scares me. It's a little better when I'm actually doing it, but just thinking about how much I have to do, frightens me. So having to come up with this sci-fi background for this character was a little daunting at first, but I'm not one to back down from a challenge that I've imposed on myself. So I decided to go for it. You can't get better if you don't practice, after all. And by trusting the process, it turned out pretty good. Not only do I think there's a good amount of detail within the background itself, it's also at a crazy, air quotes, crazy angle that really matches the perspective and angling of the character itself, which I am really pleased about because it did have the potential to look very skewed between the background and the character, and I'm very glad that it didn't. And another thing I did with the detail on this episode is I left the sketching layer that I used for the background in the final piece to give it that detail. It was inspired by the Lackadaisy animated pilot, where you can see some of the rough layers in the final animation. So like if you look at the head of the characters in some of the scenes, you can see that initial circle that the animators used to get the head in place. And they went with that for the entire pilot, and it was such a cool stylistic choice. When I saw it, I wanted to try something like that because I thought it would really help with the detail, and it did. It's very subtle that you wouldn't notice it if you weren't looking, but if you zoom into certain parts, you can see the faint sketches of the layer being sandwiched between the actual line art and the actual colors. Overall, I think that this is one of the most comic, action-heavy looking pieces I've ever drawn, and I love it. All right, we got a new day, which means another prompt to do. We got a couple more character suggestions of people who have answered in the last day or so, which I've added here to the bottom, and we're gonna spin for our first character. Let's go. Oh, it's done. All right, dealer's choice. I'm gonna keep it to our wheel here, and I'm gonna say Rambly Raccoon is going to be our first character, and he will be fused with, let's see. It's a nice day we're having. Things are just kind of going here. Okay, well, we can't do Monica again, so it's gonna sneakily, whoop, forgot to remove it. And let's spin again. Our next character is going to be Siren Head. Okay. Not technically a video game character, but a horror character that has been featured in several indie games. So I think it's fair game. Let's see what it'll look like. Let's go. Although I did get the dealer's choice part of the wheel, I really like the idea of sticking with the characters provided within the comments. That way the most amount of people who commented can get their character chosen, even if one of them wasn't by chance. And so I decided to go with Rambly Raccoon. Also because I really want to work with Indigo Park, because that is a really well-made indie horror game. Nice job over there at the development team. However, like Elster, Rambly's design is a little on the minimal side. And then once I rolled Siren Head, I got a bit worried again, because now we're working with two characters that don't have highly detailed character designs. Siren Head is, well, just that, a siren head. But on the other hand, Rambly's design is very much in his head for the most part. With head to the handkerchief, I would argue, is the biggest part of Rambly's design. And so I had to find a way to incorporate the headless Siren Head with the head full Rambly Raccoon. And so what I ended up doing was taking Siren Head's body and plopping Rambly's head on top of it kind of like Sid from Toy Story when he was mixing up all the toys in this grotesque manner. And then I took Siren Head sirens and put them inside of Rambly's ears like a really messed up pair of AirPods. So then you can call this character Siren Ears. That's so stupid. The final result of this being that the sirens were visible, but can easily be missed upon an initial viewing. Although I did keep the long neck and grotesque body of Siren Head, the sirens not being blaringly obvious really doesn't convey that the second character in this fusion is Siren Head. Since I was using this episode to practice my background work, I decided to use one of each piece to practice one aspect of backgrounds I wanted to work on. Monica and Elster was big on interior background practice, whereas Rambly X Siren Head here was meant to be more practice in drawing nature, specifically trees. In my past works where I've drawn nature, I've been a little iffy about how I draw and render out trees. They always seem a little muddy, but also not muddy enough that they can be called stylistic. So I've really been struggling with how to render out trees, especially rendering out dense forest where the trees go more and more into the distance. I was really trying to blend my style with the Monster Prom style of backgrounds, where the further you go into the distance, the less and less detailed the objects get until they're just a lump of shapes and colors. I don't think I nailed it, particularly in this one, but I did also use line art for the closer trees, which is something I don't usually do with backgrounds. And so the line art definitely helped, but the further trees, not 100% on. But I do think the forest aspect does come across. And now the Ferris wheel itself, I really like how the glow turned out and how the light bounces off the trees and our subject matter here. To make it seem further away and to kind of tone down the lights so they weren't just in your face and taking away from the rest of the piece, I duplicated the gradient that I used for the sky layer and faintly brushed over the Ferris wheel and some of the trees to make them appear even further into the distance than they already were. Like I mentioned in the last piece, the thought of detail scares me. And I knew that when I rolled Siren Head, I was gonna have to find a way to render out the rough and textured skin that Siren Head has in order to really sell this piece. The thing is though, once I got into the actual rendering, I didn't really follow any specific process to making the skin all wrinkly and rough and bumpy. I just began adding shadows to different places, more so inside the middle of the arm rather than just on the edges, and then going back and adding highlights to all the places that weren't covered by shadow to really round off the bumps in the skin. One thing I could have done now that I'm looking at it for these design notes, I think I would have liked to add like a rough texture over all of Siren Head's body in order to push that rough skin even further. The wrinkles look really good, but if I had added some kind of like dirt, it would have pushed it that much further. And in this piece, I've also learned that soulless black eyes is a very effective strategy when designing a horror character. Even though I did use Rambly's main face, I wanted to keep the lack of senses that Siren Head has, without the eyes, without ears, and all stuff like that. And so, instead of replacing them, I just opted to take them out and leave nothing. Although, I do wonder what they would look like if they were just completely filled in. So like if they weren't even there, like the skin just goes over it like there's nothing. I feel like that would also be creepy. Very similar to the Pale Man from Pan's Labyrinth, if any of you know that movie. All right, third day, third prompt. Really hope I didn't accidentally wear the same shirt. But our first character for the third and maybe final drawing will be... It says dealer's choice, but I honestly think that's more Ennard, so we're gonna go with Ennard, just to keep it a little fair. And our second character is going to be... I should really take the ones that won off the wheel. That would have been helpful. For this exact reason. Let's try that again. Remove. And you know what? Hold for 1 second. Alright, so what I've done is I've taken all the characters who have won, plus dealer's choice, off the wheel, but I also went through and took off any additional characters of a commenter who has already gotten picked, just to make it fair for everybody. So, our second character for this next drawing is going to be... The Knight from Hollow Knight. Let's give it a go. And last but not least, we have another detail light character with the Knight from Hollow Knight. However, this time it's at least counteracted by the insanely detailed, tangled mess of wire and tubing that is Ennard from Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. And as you can already guess by me saying that, I wasn't exactly eager to start drawing all the detail of Ennard's entrails. Yet, when actually doing it, it wasn't as bad as I expected, oddly enough. Maybe it was just a bit of a confidence boost because I was really happy with how the other two had turned out, but when doing it, it was just really easy to get this cohesive yet tangled mess of wires and tubes just overlapping each other, but also flowing in roughly the same direction, and it looked so good. Of course, it made it time consuming, but it didn't make it difficult per se. And while it may seem that having this character crawling out of a hole was an excuse for me to not draw the entire character, it was, but you don't have to worry about that. In reality, I wanted to practice my character environment interaction, whereas Monica Elster Fusion was really disconnected from the background itself. Siren Head x Rambly and Hollow Knight x Ennard are interacting with the environment around them. Speaking of the background, the other thing I wanted to practice with this one was building exteriors. While I'm pretty sure that the FNAF sister location was located underneath a more residential looking building, and I'm like 90% sure the Ennard mangled mess didn't crawl out of a perfectly circular hole, I felt that drawing a Fazbear pizza location in the background would really help sell the FNAF character in this piece. But with the mess of wires, I don't really know if that was necessary. And to be honest, I didn't do any research about all the characters I didn't know in this episode, but I do remember that Hollow Knight had a lot of insect-inspired character designs, so the whole thing kind of works, maybe? Let me know in the comments if I got that drastically wrong. And like I mentioned with the trees in the last drawing, grass is another part of my backgrounds that I never really felt were up to snuff, so to speak, in the past. Obviously, grass is hundreds of thousands of little tiny strands sticking up independent of each other, but I felt whenever I tried to do that specifically, whether by hand or using a custom brush, it always felt messy and crowded and like they didn't belong. But on the other hand, whenever I didn't do it, it felt flat and unnatural. So I decided to trust the process with this piece and kind of go for a little bit of a middle ground, doing a few tufts of grass in the line art layer, but relying more on texture brushes to sell the grassy effect. Final consensus is it looks all right, but I could definitely practice different techniques to find out what works, particularly for my style. And as you may have noticed in this piece and the last piece, I was trying to match the environment all together in the flattening stage rather than in the post-rendering phase. So instead of using like greens and browns for grass and trees and the brownish tan for the Freddy Fazbear building, I kept all my background colors confined to this faded blue to purple range that matched the night sky in the piece. Now, I don't have much to say about the rendering phase here. It was my pretty standard rendering techniques that I do usually in most of my pieces, leaning more heavily on airbrushing everything in rather than solid cell shading, which I'm trying to find a better balance of. But in all these pieces, I have started using more layers to do my shadows and highlights than I would normally do. For a usual piece, I'll have about 2 to 3 shadow layers and 2 highlight layers. The shadows on multiply, the highlights on overlay. But for these 3 pieces, it ranged anywhere from about 5 to 7 layers for shadow for the character, and then again for the background, so about 10 to 14 in total, and then once again about 3 to 4 highlight layers for the character and then background. It was a little bit more work trying to remember which of these layers are at what opacity and where I used which ones to color in which parts, but it also gave me a higher range of values that I was able to experiment with, so I could hide or enunciate certain parts of the piece, like keeping the helmet mostly in light for this character, and then having the torso almost fade into a complete silhouette as it goes more and more towards the hole. Overall, I think I really nailed the horror aspect of all 3 of these, especially in Hollow Innards and Siren Ears the Raccoon, or whatever you want to call it. I'm pleasantly surprised by my background work as well. I figured specifically practicing on them, I'd struggle a little bit more, especially the difference between interiors, exteriors, and nature itself. If you enjoyed this video and want to see even more fusion content from me, I've got a whole series about fusing characters who are voiced by the same voice actor. It's an awesome series, everyone seems to love it, and don't worry, there'll be more coming in the near future. Thank you all so much for watching this video. This was an absolute blast, and art-wise might be one of my best videos. And thank you to everyone who commented characters in the community post below. There's a whole bunch more we didn't even get to, so if you want to see round 2 of this, let me know in the comments below, and feel free to suggest some other characters from indie horror or mascot horror games. And in the comments below, also feel free to vote on awards for these 3 drawings. Your categories for this episode are Creepiest Design, Best Overall Design, and Personal Favorite Design. And to round this episode off with the awards from last episode. Last episode was the September 2024 KyngPin Recreations, where I redrew your food-based demons. And the award for Best Story goes to Thornaxius, the Pineapple Demon, from Ignatius Adoignia Dipta. The award for Best Shading goes to Transabo from Fazbear Entertainment. And the award for Creepiest Design is a tie between Burrito by Christopher Willard and Transabo from Fazbear Entertainment. Thank you all so much for voting. And to highlight comments from the last episode, our first one comes from Galahound19, who asked, "Where did you come up with the recreation prompt? It's so weirdly fun." I don't have a specific place where I came up for it. I was just thinking of topics I've done for the channel and how I can incorporate that into a recreation. I did take some inspiration from Popcross's early community recreations, where he had people redesign superheroes, but I really like the idea of a genre swap, and I really can't wait to see what you all send in. Our second comment comes from Nikolai, who says, "The plot is progressing." Also, can we get a prequel to your demon universe with 38 and 50 as the narrators? A prequel sounds really fun. Unfortunately, I don't know if I know what the prequel would entail just yet. I would have to think about a storyline to justify the prequel, but that does sound fun. And our final comment comes from Fazbear Entertainment, who says, "Lol, my submission being the thumbnail character made my day." I'm really happy I could do that for you, and awesome work on the submission. It turned out really cool, and I hope you enjoyed my recreation of it. But that's all I've got for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. Once again, Voice Actor Fusions are up here if you want to check out that series. But besides that, my name is KyngPin Creations, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.